Welcome back to Hopetales, where real stories of courage, survival, and unexpected heroes come to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Welcome back to Hopetales, where real stories of courage, survival, and unexpected heroes come to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The airport was waking up slowly, like a giant metal city stretching after a long sleep. Yellow floodlights glowed across the runway, reflecting off the morning mist. Trolleys rattled, fuel trucks hissed, and crew members marched around like tiny ants preparing a massive machine for flight. And in the middle of this routine dance, a man in an orange safety vest walked quietly, with a mop in one hand and a worn-out toolkit in the other. Adil, the cleaner, no one noticed, yet the one who noticed everything. Adil had worked at the airport for 7 years. He wasn't a technician, he wasn't a pilot, and he wasn't cabin crew. He was simply the cleaner. The man who swept crumbs off floors, wiped fingerprints off screens, and removed trash from pockets no one bothered to empty. Every day he cleaned over 6 planes. Every day he walked the empty aisles while the rest of the world slept. Every day he dreamed of becoming something more. Maybe a mechanic one day. Maybe an engineer. But life had its own timelines, not his. Still, he never complained. He loved airplanes too much. To him, every plane felt alive. The walls hummed with a heartbeat. The engines breathed power. The wings whispered stories of places they had been. And every time he stepped inside, he felt like he was entering a cathedral of steel and sky. This morning, he was assigned to clean Flight PK-982, a Boeing 777 scheduled to depart in 2 hours. A long 7-hour journey ahead. A full flight with 289 passengers booked. He climbed the stairs and entered the silent cabin. The seats were cold. Tray tables were down from the previous arrival. Overhead bins hung open like yawning mouths. The faint smell of coffee, perfume, and recycled air still lingered. Adil started his routine, checking seat pockets, wiping windows, removing trash. Nothing unusual. He moved row by row, humming softly to himself. But then it happened. As he reached row 45, something suddenly changed. A smell, sharp, metallic, slightly burnt. Something no ordinary passenger would notice. But a cleaner who worked inside aircraft daily would. He paused, sniffed again. The second breath confirmed it. This wasn't a regular burnt smell. It was burnt insulation, the smell of wires heating silently. Not enough to be smoke. Not enough to trigger alarms. But enough for someone trained, or someone with a very sharp nose, to know that something was wrong. He looked around. Nothing visible. The lights were off. The cabin dark. Most cleaners would ignore it. Most would think it's normal. Most would keep cleaning. But Adil wasn't most. He understood planes. He respected planes. He knew a plane never smells like this, unless something deep inside the walls is struggling, like a hidden heartbeat skipping a beat. He followed the faint scent. Left side? No. Right side, closer. He bent down near seat 47A. There a slight warmth near the side panel? That wasn't normal. Behind that panel ran one of the main wiring veins of the cabin. Lighting. Power outlets. Part of the entertainment system. If a wire was overheating, it meant insulation was melting. And if insulation melted, it meant a fire could start quietly any time. Maybe mid-air. Maybe during takeoff. Maybe when the plane was too far from any runway to turn back. He put down his mop and pressed his hand gently against the wall. Warm, not hot, but warm enough to be wrong. He didn't have authority. He didn't have rank. He didn't even have access to the maintenance area. But he had responsibility. Responsibility no one gave him, but he gave himself. He rushed down the stairs and approached. The ground engineer, preparing equipment outside. The engineer didn't look up. He was busy signing documents. Busy talking to a supervisor. Busy. Too busy to hear a cleaner's concern. Adil stood there quietly, waiting for the right second. 2 minutes passed. 3 minutes. 5. Finally, he stepped back inside the plane. If they wouldn't listen, he would verify again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was overthinking. But when he returned to row 47, the smell was stronger. Slightly thicker. Slightly sharper. Like something struggling inside the wall. Then he heard it, the faintest tick-tick-tick sound. A tiny electrical struggle, a wire trying to breathe through melting insulation. He froze. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. This was dangerous. This could cause a mid-air fire, the most feared situation for any pilot. He knew what he had to do. He dropped his trash bag, stepped out quickly, and marched straight to the crew office. The flight supervisor looked annoyed when he showed up, sweaty and urgent. To them, he was just a cleaner, someone who didn't belong in the crew area. But Adil did not leave. He waited. He insisted. He explained. He signaled towards the aircraft. He asked them to send any engineer, even for 2 minutes. Finally, out of irritation more than concern, the supervisor told an assistant mechanic to check whatever he's talking about. The mechanic rolled his eyes. To him, this was going to be a waste of time, just another cleaner making unnecessary. But when they climbed the stairs, when they reached row 47, when the mechanic touched the same panel, he pulled his hand back instantly. It was warm. Too warm. His expression changed. His casual attitude disappeared. He opened the panel quickly using his small toolkit. And what they found inside froze both of them. A cluster of wires had turned black. A connector was sizzling quietly. Insulation foam had started melting. A tiny ember glowed deep inside, soft but alive. 1 more hour, maybe less, and the cabin wall would have caught fire mid-air. The mechanic's face turned pale. He immediately radioed for senior engineers. Within minutes, the plane had technicians swarming around it like bees. The boarding gate was locked. The departure was delayed. No one knew why. Passengers waiting inside had no idea. Crew inside the terminal had no clue. But one person knew, a cleaner, standing quietly at a distance, holding his mop, his heart pounding, his eyes fixed on the aircraft he loved too much to let die. And for the first time in his life, someone important looked at him with respect, not because of his uniform, but because of what he saved without anyone knowing. And this was only the beginning. The sun had barely risen over the tarmac, painting the runway in shades of gold and silver. Ground crew rushed past, their radios crackling, vehicles moving in sync like a mechanical heartbeat. But at the center of it all stood Ayesha, still in her bright orange vest, watching the engineers swarm around. Flight PK-982, her, mop leaned against the stairs, forgotten in the chaos. It felt surreal. Hours ago, she had been cleaning the plane, moving silently along empty aisles. Now, every step of hers seemed like a heartbeat echoing inside a growing storm of urgency. The first engineer approached the panel she had flagged earlier. His fingers traced the edges, eyes scanning the wires. Carefully, he tested each connection with a small diagnostic tool. Sparks glinted dangerously close to melted insulation. One wrong touch could have triggered disaster mid-air. Ayesha hovered nearby, not daring to step too close. She didn't need anyone to acknowledge her. She just needed them to act fast. Every second counted. The senior engineer arrived, a seasoned professional with decades of experience. His face, usually calm, was tense now. He crouched, shone a flashlight into the panel, and studied the wires. Ayesha's heart raced as he radioed for additional technicians, requesting specialized tools to safely remove and replace the overheating wiring cluster. Passengers were still waiting in the terminal. Announcements were made, but nobody could explain the real reason behind the delay. The crew avoided panic, giving vague updates about technical checks and maintenance. Delays, only Ayesha knew that. This delay was the difference. Between life and death, time slowed. The engineers began carefully dismantling the side panel piece by piece. Small metal fragments and insulation material were set aside. The faint smell of burnt wire lingered, mixing with the scent of jet fuel and polished floors. It was subtle but unmistakable, a lingering warning of what could have been. Ayesha's eyes scanned the cabin nervously. She noticed how close the melted wires were to the seat frame, just inches from where hundreds of passengers would soon sit. One spark, one tiny ember. That was all it would have taken. The engineers worked methodically, replacing the affected wires with new, properly insulated ones. Ayesha watched every movement, mentally noting every tool, every step, every precaution they took. She didn't understand all the technical details, but her instincts told her that everything had to be perfect. Every small error could mean catastrophe. Hours passed. Sweat dripped down Ayesha's brow. Not from physical exertion, but from sheer anxiety. The terminal staff had begun noticing the unusual delay. Rumors started to spread among passengers. Some complained. Others tried to remain patient. Meanwhile, the maintenance team moved quickly but carefully, aware that this plane could not leave the ground until the wiring issue was completely resolved. Finally, the last wire was secured. Engineers tested every system, lights, entertainment, power outlets, emergency alarms. Everything functioned flawlessly. The warning smell was gone. No sparks, no heat, no risk. Ayesha stepped back, letting the technicians finish their inspection. Her heart was still racing, but a sense of relief washed over her. She knew she had prevented something invisible yet deadly. A disaster that could have claimed hundreds of lives had ended before it even began. The lead engineer approached her briefly, nodding in acknowledgement. Not a word was needed. The nod said it all. He understood that this girl, just a cleaner, had seen what nobody else did. Her senses, her courage, and her insistence had saved 289 passengers. But the story was not over. News of the incident began to filter through internal channels. Airport authorities were notified. Reports were filed. Safety protocols were reviewed. Questions were raised. How did the overheating wires go? Unnoticed during prior inspections? How close was the plane to departure when the hazard was discovered? Ayesha quietly cleaned the small tools and scraps left behind, returning to her routine as if nothing had happened. She didn't seek fame or recognition. She didn't want applause. All she wanted was for the plane and its passengers to be safe. Later, as she walked away from the aircraft, she overheard a senior staff member telling a colleague, "If it weren't for her, we might have had a disaster today." For a moment, Ayesha allowed herself a small smile. She had done her duty, and though the world outside might never know her name, the lives on that plane carried her heroism silently. She glanced back one last time at Flight PK 982. Now grounded but fully repaired, its engines idle yet ready for flight. Somewhere inside, passengers waited to board, oblivious to how close they had come to danger. And somewhere inside Ayesha's chest, pride mixed with humility. A reminder that courage often comes in unexpected forms. And heroes are not always in uniforms that people notice. That evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hangars, casting long shadows over the runway, Ayesha left the tarmac quietly. She passed rows of parked planes, the engines still humming faintly in the cooling air. She carried no medals, no news crew, no recognition, only the knowledge that she had been the unseen guardian of hundreds of lives. And deep inside, she knew one thing clearly. Her job was not just to clean planes, it was to protect them. The terminal staff had begun noticing the unusual delay. Rumors started to spread among passengers. Some complained. Others tried to remain patient. Meanwhile, the maintenance team moved quickly but carefully, aware that this plane could not leave the ground until the wiring issue was completely resolved. Finally, the last wire was secured. Engineers tested every system, lights, entertainment, power outlets, emergency alarms. Everything functioned flawlessly. The warning smell was gone. No sparks, no heat, no risk. Ayesha stepped back, letting the technicians finish their inspection. Her heart was still racing, but a sense of relief washed over her. She knew she had prevented something invisible yet deadly. A disaster that could have claimed hundreds of lives had ended before it even began. The lead engineer approached her briefly, nodding in acknowledgement. Not a word was needed. The nod said it all. He understood that this girl, just a cleaner, had seen what nobody else did. Her senses, her courage, and her insistence had saved 289 passengers. But the story was not over. News of the incident began to filter through internal channels. Airport authorities were notified. Reports were filed. Safety protocols were reviewed. Questions were raised. How did the overheating wires go? Unnoticed during prior inspections? How close was the plane to departure when the hazard was discovered? Ayesha quietly cleaned the small tools and scraps left behind, returning to her routine as if nothing had happened. She didn't seek fame or recognition. She didn't want applause. All she wanted was for the plane and its passengers to be safe. Later, as she walked away from the aircraft, she overheard a senior staff member telling a colleague, "If it weren't for her, we might have had a disaster today." For a moment, Ayesha allowed herself a small smile. She had done her duty, and though the world outside might never know her name, the lives on that plane carried her heroism silently. She glanced back one last time at Flight PK 982. Now grounded but fully repaired, its engines idle yet ready for flight. Somewhere inside, passengers waited to board, oblivious to how close they had come to danger. And somewhere inside Ayesha's chest, pride mixed with humility, a reminder that courage often comes in unexpected forms. And heroes are not always in uniforms that people notice. That evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hangars, casting long shadows over the runway, Ayesha left the tarmac quietly. She passed rows of parked planes, the engines still humming faintly in the cooling air. She carried no medals, no news crew, no recognition, only the knowledge that she had been the unseen guardian of hundreds of lives. And deep inside, she knew one thing clearly. Her job was not just to clean planes, it was to protect them. The morning sun had fully risen, glinting off the polished fuselage of flight. PK 982. Engineers had completed their work. Every wire was replaced, every system tested. The cabin smelled clean again, faint traces of antiseptic mixed with polished metal. Passengers started boarding, unaware of the near disaster that had almost unfolded. Their chatter and laughter echoed through the terminal, masking the quiet tension that still lingered in the hearts of those who knew what had almost happened. Ayesha walked behind the boarding gate slowly, her mop and cleaning kit packed away. She was ready to leave, ready to fade into the background as usual. But something inside her insisted she watch just a little longer. The cabin doors closed. Flight attendants walked the aisles, checking seatbelts, overhead bins, and tray tables. Lights flicked on. Emergency exits were verified. Engines roared to life, vibrating gently beneath the aircraft. Ayesha's eyes moved over the cabin. Row by row, she silently scanned every passenger as they settled into their seats. Some were dozing, others scrolling on phones, a few nervously gripping the armrests. She remembered the exact spot where the wires had overheated row 47, seat A. A simple ember, unnoticed, could have changed every single life on this plane. She sighed, feeling a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. Boarding completed. Passengers seated. Everything seemed normal. Then she noticed something odd. From her vantage point at the back of the cabin, she saw a faint flicker near the same side panel she had flagged before. Not the wires, and they were fine now, but a small reflection, like something inside the wall catching the light. She paused, heart racing. Could it be another fault? Before she could move, the chief flight attendant stepped toward her. She waved politely, asking her to return to the terminal. Ayesha shook her head subtly. She couldn't ignore her instincts now. The plane taxied toward the runway, engines humming steadily. Ayesha followed at a discreet distance on the stairs, just watching. A soft gust of wind carried the smell of jet fuel, mixed with polished metal and cleaning detergent. A normal day for others, a tension-filled morning for her. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and collected. Passengers felt safe. Crew felt professional. But Ayesha's eyes never left the faint reflection near row 47. Her instinct screamed. She moved quickly, unnoticed. She reached the aisle, crouched slightly, and looked closer. A small connector near the panel had come loose during the final testing, a subtle displacement that could have caused a short circuit mid-flight. Time felt frozen. She carefully grabbed her toolkit, usually tucked away, and gently pushed the connector back into place. No one noticed. No one would ever know. She wasn't allowed in the cockpit. She wasn't meant to be near the electrical systems while passengers were boarding, but she did it anyway. She sat back, trying to remain calm. Her hands shook slightly. Another minute of delay, another small movement of the connector, and the plane could have experienced a mid-air electrical fault. Maybe not catastrophic, maybe terrifying sparks or partial systems failure, but enough to endanger hundreds of lives. The plane reached the runway. Engines increased to full power. Passengers gripped armrests, excited for takeoff. The plane lifted smoothly, climbing above clouds into bright blue sky. Ayesha watched until it was no longer visible from the ground, feeling a strange mixture of relief and quiet heroism. She had done more than clean. She had done more than observe. She had saved 289 lives, invisibly, silently, without recognition. Hours later, the plane landed safely at its destination. Crew and passengers applauded the smooth flight. No one knew how close they had been to danger. No one knew that a small, unnoticed ember in a cabin wall had almost changed everything. Ayesha returned home that evening, tired but fulfilled. Her uniform smelled faintly of jet fuel and detergent. Her hands bore minor scratches from moving panels and wires. She washed them carefully, reflecting on the day. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. The world would never know. But inside, she carried a quiet pride. Not for recognition, not for fame, but for the knowledge that her vigilance and courage had protected hundreds of lives today. In the airport the next day, other staff whispered about the delay, curious about the technical emergency. Some speculated about wiring issues, others about minor maintenance. Only a few remembered the cleaner who had insisted something was wrong. But they wouldn't mention her name. And Ayesha? She was already preparing for the next plane. Another cabin, another aisle, another chance to protect lives silently. Because that's what heroes do. They don't wait for medals. They act, even when nobody is watching. And in that quiet, courageous action, the fate of 289 lives had been rewritten by a girl who had only ever been just a cleaner. The day had ended, but for Ayesha, the events of the morning still lingered in her mind like the echo of a distant engine. Flight PK-982 had taken off safely. The passengers were now miles above the clouds, oblivious to the disaster that had nearly occurred. She walked through the quiet airport hangar, her mop slung over her shoulder, eyes scanning rows of parked aircraft. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows over the tarmac. Every plane glinted like a silver sentinel, waiting for its next journey. Her thoughts drifted back to the small panel at row 47, one misplaced connector, one ember that could have ignited a catastrophe, one spark that could have turned a routine flight into chaos. And yet, it hadn't. No one knew it had been her. No one would ever know. And yet, in her heart, she carried the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message from the senior engineer who had been on the plane earlier. "Good job today. You saved lives. Not many know it, but you did. Thank you." Ayesha smiled softly, her eyes misty. She typed back a small "thank you" and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Recognition was nice, but it wasn't why she did what she did. She did it because she had to. Because she couldn't ignore a warning. Because she believed in responsibility, courage, and the invisible threads that connected her actions to the lives of hundreds. That evening, news of the minor wiring emergency spread quietly among the internal staff. Some whispered about the near disaster, amazed at how close the plane had been to a malfunction midair. Engineers praised each other. Supervisors filed reports. And somewhere in those reports, a brief mention of a cleaner's observation made it into the logs. A small acknowledgement, almost invisible. But it existed. Meanwhile, at the airport cafeteria, Ayesha sat quietly, sipping chai, listening to colleagues talk about routine flights, minor delays and technical checks. She didn't join the chatter. She didn't need to. The events of the day had already filled her with purpose. Later, walking to the exit, she paused for a moment. Across the tarmac, she saw flight PK-982 disappearing into the sunset, its engines glowing softly. She imagined the passengers inside, going about their journey, unaware of how close they had been to danger. Her heart swelled with quiet pride. In that moment, she realized something profound. Heroes aren't always celebrated. They don't always appear on screens or in headlines. Some heroes exist in silence, acting when it matters most, protecting lives without the world ever knowing. Ayesha had been one of those heroes. And yet, as the airport lights flickered on and the night settled over the hangars, she also knew this was just one flight. One plane, one day. The world of aviation would continue. Thousands of passengers, dozens of flights, countless hazards. And she would continue too, quietly, vigilantly, ready to act whenever duty called. That night she returned home. Her uniform hung neatly in the wardrobe. Her hands were clean. Her spirit, however, was forever marked by the knowledge that she had made a real difference. In the quiet of her small room, she reflected, courage isn't always loud. Heroism doesn't always have a medal. Sometimes it is the simple act of noticing what others overlook. Sometimes it is the determination to act when no one is watching, and sometimes it is enough to save 289 lives. As she closed her eyes, a gentle smile formed on her lips. The world didn't know her name. The passengers didn't know she existed. But they were alive, soaring through the clouds, because she had seen what nobody else did and acted without hesitation. And that was enough. The end.